And then we have the issue of also on the disability issue, children when children who are living with hearing impairment, some of their parents they don't even know how to speak language, and this becomes a problem because the child on a normal condition they would communicate with their teachers and with the people that they will be, but the fact that the parents are not able to sign, communication becomes a barrier. And then we have got the issue of health for girls' menstruation cycle. There has been organizations and donors who have been providing them and donating sanitary pads and sanitary wear. And now, due to the lockdown, organizations are not moving to these children. So this becomes a problem because children are now engaging into using unhealthy clothes, which may also lead to bad health conditions. So these are some of the issues and experiences that children are going through during the lockdown. And also we have got a youth who are losing their jobs because most shops are closing down and shutting down because of non-functioning. So these are some of the issues that children are facing in Zimbabwe, just to mention a few, but there are lots and lots of issues that these children and youth are going through during the lockdown COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roarashe. I am glad that you are not one of those, the youth who went into depression. And I pray that you keep it like that. We will have our last youth, Felicitas from CRNSA. I don't see Felicitas, but from the youth submissions, it seems that apart from the second wave of COVID-19, we are going to have a wave of social issues, which range from child labor, child prostitution, depression, dropouts, a generation of uneducated youth. The social ills are endless. So it seems like we are going to be within other pandemics, as the youth have just outlined to us. And this just makes the work of members of parliament even more difficult, considering that they have to make sure that the budgets and the fiscal policies are addressing these issues. So I'm hoping that at the end of this meeting, we'll be able to come up with not many concrete recommendations, but at least one or two which we can implement, which we can take away from this meeting. I will now move on to fair financing and tax justice for children from SAPST Trust, and Mr. Atwell Gonese is our presenter. Mr. Gonese, sir.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. A good day to the honourable members, the Vice President, Honourable Chief Charumbira, and all members of Parliament present, the Clerk of Parliament and the Secretariat, colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My presentations will be in two parts. The first one will focus on fair financing and tax justice for children, which really is just a continuation of the discussion that we have been having. And then the other one will look at what Parliament can do. Again, I think it's a continuation given the discussions that we have been having. And maybe going straight to the first presentation, which focuses on fair financing and tax justice for children. The main issue, I think the starting point is why do we need fair financing and also tax justice for children? And obviously the starting point is the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the CRC, which committed parties or in which states parties made a commitment to take all necessary and legislative, administrative and other measures to realize children's rights. And as in Africa, almost all countries are signatories to this, with the exception of, I think, Somalia and South Sudan. With regards to economic, social, and cultural rights, state parties shall undertake such measures to the maximum extent of their available resources and where needed within the framework of international cooperation. The key word being to the maximum extent of their available resources. Then there is also the economic argument we have had. I think the Honourable Chief Rumbira touched on it. We need to invest in human capital. There's also the political and social argument, which says when we have inadequate social investment, the high levels of inequality and severe poverty can undermine social cohesion. So these are some of the justifications for fair financing and tax justice for children. And by fair financing, really, we are just focusing on ensuring that we provide resources or we make resources available, especially for child-focused sectors, keeping in mind issues of equity. We need to create equal opportunities for all children to realize their rights. We have already heard from previous speakers that the pandemic has shown the inequalities that are existing within countries and across countries. And I think this is the time to ensure that when we allocate our resources or as Parliament approves the budgets, they also look at the most excluded children and ensure that they are reached with essential services. We have heard from previous speakers the most marginalized, like refugees, internally displaced children, children with disabilities. All these need to be catered for in our budgets. There's also the issue of the social spending targets that most countries have committed. For example, in Africa, we had the Abuja Declaration, which says 15% of annual health budget should, or 15% of the total budget should go towards health. And this has not been met. And I think this is the right time to again have the discussion where we ensure that the 15% is met. I think we have seen how the impact has been far much higher for children as a result of us not allocating the 15% towards health, or for example, 9% towards education, 9% of our GDP towards education. Then I think more, instead of just looking at allocation, the other issue really is about the disbursements. Because at some time, you would find that the allocations are made in the budget, but then when it comes to the actual budget implementation, there are no disbursements that are made. And this is the time to also ensure that we ensure the disbursements or whatever would have been allocated is disbursed, and it also reaches the beneficiaries and it's utilized for its intended purpose. So in terms of resources, where can we get these resources? The traditional ones is through domestic resource mobilization, also overseas development assistance, combating illicit financial flows, and other sources that we can utilize. The issue of debt has also been highlighted. It's another source of finance, but which we need to be careful that we do it in a sustainable manner. Then we have noticed that domestic resource mobilization, or especially through taxation, is the most significant and sustainable source of revenue for governments. And this is confirmed even in our sustainable development goals, and also even the Convention for the Child Rights, which also recognize taxation as the most important and most significant source of revenue. So, which is why the discussion really is focusing on taxation and why we need to have why we need to have tax justice And by tax justice, really, we're just talking of a system or tax systems that generate sufficient public revenue while ensuring that this revenue is fairly redistributed and focused on rebalancing inequalities. And so tax systems need to deliver sufficient quality public services and also meet other public expenditures. And in terms of children's rights, we can look at taxation from what has been termed the 4 Rs, where we look at it as providing resources, the revenue needed for expenditure. It can also be used to redistribute resources from those with and to those without, as a repricing mechanism where we, and also as a representation mechanism. So these are the 4 ways that we can utilize taxation. And in terms of, it's important that when we are designing our tax systems or when we are looking at the tax system, it should be as efficient as possible. That is, it should minimize the compliance costs to business and also administration costs for governments. And also in a long way, it should also ensure that there is minimum tax avoidance or tax evasion, and as many people as possible are paying their taxes. And there are also equity considerations which are important, and this we can look at it from 2 ways: the horizontal equity as well as the vertical equity. And in terms of horizontal equity, this suggests that taxpayers in similar circumstances should bear a similar tax burden. And then looking at it from a vertical equity, it means that those in better circumstances should bear a large part of tax burden as a proportion of their income. I think the keywords that we normally use are, we need a progressive tax, which is one that really places the biggest burden on those most able to pay. And some of the taxes that are used include direct taxes, like taxes on income or taxes on property. These are direct taxes, and which normally really take into consideration ability for either a person or a group to pay. And these are more progressive taxes. And during this time of COVID-19, it's important that we relook at the taxes that we are using and also ensure that those who have been most affected by the pandemic, we also provide tax reliefs to them, and so that they can be in a position to also build back better in a sustainable way. Then when we look at some taxes which are regressive, this is where really it does not consider the ability of someone to pay, but where everyone pays the same amount of taxes regardless of their income or ability to pay. And in recent times, we've seen the move towards indirect taxes, such as the value-added tax, which really target consumption of goods and services. While they are, because of our economies, which are mainly of an informal nature, we end up relying on these indirect taxes. So what we really need to look at is how best can we ensure that at the end of the day, whatever revenue we collect, it goes to the most disadvantaged people or addresses the plight of the most vulnerable. And here, looking at issues of children, how can you ensure that whatever revenue we collect, it can also deal with the rights of the children, the rights to survival, the rights to development in a safe manner. And the other issues of consideration when looking at taxation, we also expect the tax rules should be clear and simple to understand. We need for the tax system to be effective, and also issues of fairness, minimizing issues of tax avoidance, and others. I think now going to one of a key issue that has come out, especially during this COVID-19, we've heard from the previous speaker that revenue is going to decline across almost all countries, I think except for one. And the IMF has also said that revenue in sub-Saharan Africa is going to decrease by, on average, as much as $70 billion US, which is about 2.6% of country's product. And looking at such a huge drop, I think it should take us back to the issues of plugging gaps of illicit financial flows or the revenue leakages that are undermining the capacity of African countries to collect revenue. And the starting point really has to be the Africa Union and the Economic Commission for Africa high-level panel report on illicit financial flows of 2015, which noted that illicit financial flows have been costing Africa about 50 billion every year in terms of revenue lost. And of these, 65% is as a result of commercial transactions, 30% is as a result of illegal activities, and 5% is a result of corruption. And now when you contrast that to what Africa has been receiving, we also noted that in the past 50 years, I think that was from 2015 and before, Africa had lost about $1 trillion to illicit financial flows. And this 1 trillion is almost equivalent to the aid that we receive. So instead of focusing on receiving aid, I think it's important that we really go back and look at what has been causing the leakages in terms of revenue. And in the report, one of the main was tax evasion, where taxpayers deliberately conceal their tax liability and from the revenue authorities, and in a way end up losing revenue. Then the other main issue was trade misinvoicing, which is a form of fraud or tax fraud involving exporters and importers, and where they deliberately again misreport the value or quantity or nature of goods or services. And some reports say this constitutes about 80%, 60 to 80% of the illicit financial flows. Then there's another issue of transfer pricing or mispricing, where really companies try to shift their profits from one area to another, making use of from a higher tax jurisdiction to a lower tax jurisdiction. And really, here players are just taking advantage of the rules. So again, and the issue of corruption, which is taking about 5%, I think, at this particular point in time, it's very important that we revisit the issue of missed opportunities. Another report which came out last year from the ECA, the Economic Commission for Africa, showed that if we eliminate base erosion and profit shifting, and by this we mean that amount to exploit gaps and mismatch tax rules to avoid paying taxes. We eliminate this, we can get as much as an additional 2.7% of our GDP in the revenue. And another, from the same report, it also showed that if we eliminate or we close loopholes related to treaty shopping, where companies try to take advantage of or takes advantage in cross-border transactions, we can also increase our corporate taxes collection in those countries by about 15%. Using to try and attract investment is the issue of tax incentives. Taxes contributed on resources, and if any benefit in terms of education, that's 86 billion every year. In terms of the incentives that we are giving, is equivalent to about 47% of our education spending. So if we deal with the issue of tax incentives or the exemptions or preferential treatment that is being given to multinational corporation, we can actually get an additional 47% or 38.6 billion in terms of resources for dealing, which we can actually even use to deal with the pandemic in terms of ensuring that schools are open safely during this pandemic, and also even the social transfers that are needed for the most vulnerable children, and the issues of the health, dealing with the health pandemic. And again, in terms of looking at just how much we are losing as a continent in terms of these tax incentives, the ECA report of 29 shows that for us to achieve just 1% increase in total investment, governments are losing as much as 20% in terms of tax revenues. So at this point, as the Pan-African Parliament, as parliamentarians in your own countries, and even as I think this is the right time to also again bring the discussion so that we plug these gaps. And when you look, compare in terms of spending, most countries have failed to reach the 15% in terms of health expenditure. And you look at also even in terms of education, most countries are also failing to reach the 20% Dakar Declaration or 9% of GDP towards education. So it's important that we make sure that we, as countries or as Africa, we develop a robust tax collection systems which can monitor outflows and detect and react to illicit financial drain. There's also need for the legislatures or the parliamentarians for you to enact and implement laws or regulations and policy frameworks aimed at facilitating the implementation of the high-level panel recommendations, specifically targeting at issues of trade mispricing, transfer pricing, base erosion, and profit shifting, as well as also dealing with issues of corruption. There's also need for African governments to evaluate all the tax incentives that are there and discard those which are not bringing any benefits to the continent. And if possible, I think it's even better to just do away with the tax incentives. And if we do that as all countries and as all African countries, I think then we can create the necessary resources for us to fight the pandemic. Then there's also the need to ensure that taxes are done in a progressive manner and the burden of taxation does not fall disproportionately on the poor, especially with inequalities rising. There's been a shift or a push towards informal taxation. I think during this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's also important to reevaluate the taxes that are being towards the informal sectors so that we also bring relief to the informal sectors, because most of these informal sectors are also struggling and they are in need of some form of tax relief, especially during this pandemic, which can also help even in terms of meeting the children's rights. Then there's also need for increasing transparency. I think we've had the issue of transparency in terms of debt. This also goes to the issues of taxation, the issues of how government is spending its resources. There is need for increased transparency during this pandemic, and also maybe expanding the network of for exchange of information so that countries can also join the various projects that are taking place trying to deal with tax evasion and tax avoidance issues. And another, the project, the base erosion profit shifting project is one of them. Then there is the extractive industries transparency initiative. As Africa, we are a resource-based continent and we rely very much on revenue from minerals and oil. So we also need to plug the gaps in the extractive sector. Then take advantage of the digitization and other information technologies so that we deal with the administrative costs and in a way also increase revenue mobilization. So I think in a nutshell, these are some of the ways that I think we need to look at so that we make sure that we have enough resources to fight the COVID pandemic, as well as also to provide and meet the children as rights. And tax is a far-reaching and sustainable solution to investing in children needs to be prioritized and streamlined to guarantee positive and practical changes in the lives of children. Thank you very much. This is the first part of my presentation. Can I move on to the next part? Hello, Madam Moderator.
Yes. What is your second part?
The role of Parliament in promoting investment.
Okay. I think that is fine. But I think that as you do that, it's important for you because since this is a briefing of mostly civil society to Parliament to say what are the things that parliaments can do, if you can zero in on the practical matters which our parliament can assist with. So yes, you can proceed.
Thank you very much. I will try and focus on that. I think the first part was just to highlight or to bring to the attention of the parliamentarians where we are losing the revenue and what can be done. But then looking at what Parliament can do in terms of promoting investment in children, the first part is that Parliament's power of the pace or your role in terms of approving the budget. I think this is the starting point where you can actually help in terms of increasing resources towards children's rights. And as we highlighted earlier on, domestic revenue, especially from taxes, is the most important and significant source of revenue for government to finance public spending. And as the legislature or as parliaments are the representatives of the people, it's important that they ensure that the budget matches the nation's needs, the available resources. It's also important that through your oversight or Parliament's oversight and legislative role, can ensure that adequate resources and efficient utilization of resources towards the promotion of children's rights are met. So there's also the issue of transparency. We need to have fiscal transparency, accountability, and also maintaining institutional legitimacy is also key, especially during this pandemic. You would find that almost all African countries or all countries in the world have at least undertaken some fiscal measures or adjustments to the budget during this pandemic, or even some countries are in the process of coming up with their budgets for the coming for the next financial year. And this is the time really for Parliament to play its role. But then again, in terms of playing its role, it's important that Parliament does not just limit itself to the budget formulation stage, but rather look at all the stages of the budget process. That is from the budget formulation to the approval process and then the process. And during this time of the pandemic, obviously the use of visual platforms is one way of doing it. But given the percentages that we have seen in terms of access to internet, which are at a very low stage, there is also need even to go beyond the visual platforms and also do the physical consultations in a safe manner. So there's need for resources to be put in place that ensure that you can still consult the citizens, consult the children in a safe manner, so that you also appreciate what the needs that they have, and you take those needs from the stakeholders and use them during your the discussions with the executive. And this really should form, because we need evidence-based advocacy for child-related policy as well as allocations. And for us to get the evidence, the starting point really is from the stakeholder consultations. Then there's also need to look at policy analysis, looking at, I think, the policies that are there, the present policies, as well as the policies that government are proposing to deal with the COVID-19 pandemics. We need to look at this from a child rights perspective and really focusing on issues of health, issues of poverty, education, water, sanitation, and hygiene, issues of addressing the needs of vulnerable children. We need all this at the starting point, at the formulation stage, because the starting point really is from the planning stage. If there are plans to meet the children's rights, then chances are high that the allocations will be made towards the children's rights. We also need to look at issues of performance targets, linking child-related program goals to budget allocations and expenditure. It should be clear that when the government is saying we're allocating so much towards education, where is the money going to? And what is that the government is trying to achieve? It should be clear and clearly spelled out in the policies and the plans that the government comes up with. Then at this early age, again, at the budget formulation stage, which is the strategic planning phase, it must also address the issues of audit recommendations. Because these audit recommendations can also help plug the gaps that are available in terms of meeting children's rights, or in terms of raising the necessary revenue, as well as in terms of the spending, how government is undertaking its spending, and issues of efficiency in terms of spending comes to play. So at this particular stage, it's very important to also appreciate what the rights are saying. The UN, the CRIC, what is it saying in terms of the rights that we need to ensure are made for the children? And then moving on from that formulation stage, when the policies have been put in place, the necessary policies have been put in place, we can then see what are the allocations that have been put in place, especially for child-related expenditures. And we want to see really the adequacy of the government allocation. Is it going to be sufficient to meet the rights of the children? We also need to look at the issues of priority. Does the priority the priorities in line with the policies and the promises, as well as the commitments that the government has made, particularly looking at does it address the best interests of the child? And then there's the issue of progress. We also want to see that we're making progress in terms of both the priorities and also in terms of achieving or realizing children's rights. And we can see that by the amount of resources that are being allocated towards child-related expenditures. And looking at during this particular time of the COVID-19, we have already heard of the impact in terms of COVID-19 that it is having on children. So you would want to see the resources. Are there any specific resources that are being put in place to ensure that schools open safely, that ensures that there is water, and we address sanitation issues in schools, which will allow for the schools to open? Then there's the issue of that has been highlighted, the issue of school meals. Do we have any specific allocations, or what are the plans to ensure that the children that we're receiving meals at schools, they can continue to receive those meals? And these are the issues that we need to look at when we are looking at the budget approval stage. Then we also need to look at issues of equity and to ensure that the poorest and most excluded children, such as the refugees, the internally displaced persons, that they are reached, the children with disabilities are also reached, and they get essential services for their survival, learning, and protection. Then it's important, I think, to advocate for disaggregated budget lines, which clearly shows the planned expenditure for children, and which can also show us both the revised and actual expenditures that directly affect children, especially at the budget approval stage. This can help in terms of analyzing the budget from a child rights perspective. And Parliament here, this is where it can use its approval powers to push for increased funding for social sectors. But even during these times when we have emergent support, I think it's important that by Parliament. And the priority really, the budget approval stage, this is where we can push for social spending in line with the Abuja Declaration, 15% towards health, 9% of GDP towards education. And we can also utilize the Sustainable Development Goals framework with its indicators. This can also help us in terms of ensuring that we meet children's rights. Then at the implementation stage, this is where Parliaments really need to ensure that they can track and monitor the budget to ensure that the performance of the budget is as optimal as possible, and also to ensure that the commitments cited in the budget documents are translated into reality or practice. It's important to monitor the child-related disbursements, as I highlighted earlier. It's not just about allocation, but the actual disbursements. Do they reach the intended beneficiaries? And it's also important that the Parliament can work together with civic society organizations and other non-state actors to track where the resources are going towards so that they reach the intended beneficiaries. Then it's important to ensure that there's financial discipline, equity is achieved, as well as efficiency and effectiveness of resource utilization. And in terms of when we look at issues of efficiency, we want to ensure that the goods and services are achieved at the lowest possible cost. While in terms of effectiveness, we also want to see that is government achieving its outcomes and strategic objectives. And really here, issues of performance information is important so that we can be able to track and also be able to monitor what government is doing. And government can work again together with the citizens themselves, the children themselves, using a variety of tools such as the citizen report cards, where citizens rate the services that they are getting from the government, as well as community scorecards and public expenditure tracking surveys, which can help in terms of following the money to ensure that it reaches its intended beneficiaries. And it's important that we get, as Parliament, get as much feedback as possible, and particularly from the citizens and the children themselves. Then in terms of the oversight role of Parliament, there's need to monitor, evaluate, and auditing of public funds to provide the checks and balances that promote sound financial management. At this particular time where really resources are few and the requirements are even higher because of the pandemic, it's important that the audit, we strengthen the audit to increase transparency and accountability of public expenditure. And during this pandemic, we actually need to have regular audits so that we plug the gaps that might arise in terms of corruption, in terms of even the procurement processes. They must also be tightened so that we have as much resources available as possible. And also so that the procurement process, when it takes place, really, it buys the right products at the right price. And in that way, we also create the necessary space, and we also have efficient and effective utilization of resources. From the previous audit reports in your various countries, these should also help.
Sorry, Mr. Gonese, can you wind up, because we still have another presentation on Save the Children. And remember, this meeting is about concrete actions. So if I can just give you a minute to wind up so that Save the Children can make their presentation on social protection.
Yes, I was actually left with just 2 slides. Thank you. So as I was saying, that it's important that we track the additional COVID-19 related spending through dedicated programs or sections of the budget, and also ensure that even the donor, those resources that are coming from the donors, we also need to monitor them, especially during this pandemic. Then we need regular reporting of the progress of implementation. If possible, I think this should be even increased to maybe weekly or monthly, so that the information is clear. A good example where we can, as Parliament or instituting parliamentary oversight of implementation, is like what the New Zealand Parliament has done, where they established a parliamentary select committee, the Epidemic Response Committee, which meets regularly just to scrutinize government response to COVID-19 while the House is not sitting. So I think it's important that we can also adopt some of these measures that other progressive parliaments are doing, so that we have as much as possible resources for the fight of COVID-19, or even for implementation, or making sure that children's rights are met. And I think it's important to involve CSOs as much as possible. The issue of transparency, I've already highlighted, is crucial in terms of ensuring that there's as much resources as possible. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gonese. Save the Children.
Screen sharing.
Sorry,
Good
Mr. Gwenese, can
afternoon.
you remove? Sorry, can Mr. Gwenese remove his presentation from the?
Okay.
Okay.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. All protocols observed. I realize that we have spent a lot of time already, so I think I will just go to the practical actions because I may not have enough time to go through all that I had prepared on social protection. I'm presenting this on behalf of Save the Children, who are our funding partners. I work with African Platform of Social Protection. So I will just go direct to the actions because of time. So some of the practical actions when it comes to social protections include the immediate rollout or expansion of social assistance to families, preferably through use of universal child grants, which offer a simple and proven tool for shielding children from extreme poverty. There is also the urgent need of securing of food supply chains and local markets to protect children from a food security crisis, prioritizing the continuity of child-centered services with a particular focus on equity, access, and then also providing practical support to parents and caregivers, including how to talk about the pandemic with children, how to manage their own mental health and the mental health of their children, and tools to help support their children's learning. We also need to put in place specific protections for vulnerable children, including the migrants, the displaced, refugees, minorities, slum dwellers, children living with disabilities, children living in refugee settlements, children living in institutions, and children living on the streets. The parliamentarians also need to rapidly expand access to healthcare and other services, supporting expansion of family-friendly policies such as unpaid leave and sick leave, strengthening public finance response to social protection, and meaningfully engage children and parents or guardians in COVID-19 meetings, and even when it comes to budgeting, as one of the child representatives had indicated initially. And then social protection policies and programs should be child sensitive. And lastly, governments to allocate higher percentage of GDP that is inclusive to child social protection. At the moment, on average, countries, 1.1% of their GDP is on child benefits. So that allocation needs to go up because that is a very small percentage. 1.1% is a very small percentage. So thank you very much. My name is Cyril Lahey from APSP. I think that is all I can share for now because of time.
Please unmute.
Madam Lynn, you are muted.
I was saying that I would like to thank the presenters for the information that they have shared with us, which was one of the main objectives for this workshop, to exchange views, to exchange information. Since this is one of a series of such kind of meetings, I don't think that we should have a discussion, but what I would request is to request the different presenters to just tell us in very simple terms how they think the Pan-African Parliament can assist in this process. And then after that, I'll then ask our Vice President to respond. and then hopefully we'll have a follow-up to this webinar, because I realized that some of the committees which were supposed to have been here, who would have benefited a lot from this meeting, were actually not present. And therefore, we would like to take this process further, and we would not want this process to stop here. Mr. Gonese mentioned something about civil society participation in parliamentary processes. Indeed, that is it, as it should be, because you give the members of parliament information, the members of parliament use that information in parliaments. Unfortunately, what has been happening is that civil society has not been forthcoming with information, and hence the disjoint and the disjunction. But it is my hope that from today onwards, going forward, we should have a comprehensive program of information sharing where civil society gives the Pan-African Parliament the information, the Pan-African Parliament looks at the information, invites you to their committees to make these presentations, make resolutions, and take them to the African Union. So that at least the processes are linked and the use of the information is effective. So to our panelists to say, what is it that you're expecting the Pan-African members of parliament? We are clear on what they are, the expectations are. So I will give our panelists a minute. I think I'll start with the SAPST they are expecting the Pan-African Parliament to do. Yes, sir.
Don't you think one or two of the participants may have a comment? Maybe let's make it one.
Okay. The chief says, that's why he's a chief. The chief is saying that one or two comments are allowed. If we have any comments, please raise your hand, and Dominic will identify you and will give you some time to make some comments. Dominic, do you have any hands up?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
I think that then you're going to move forward. Let's move.
Okay. So,
but advise the presenters that they've already presented. If you got to present again, we've been presenting for more than 1.5 hours now. 2 hours.
Yes.
I think we're not going to listen to more presentations or repeat presentations. And I think this could be just 1 minute. Otherwise, it will be a repeat of what we've done.
That's true. So we'll start with, I think we should end with SAPST Trust. So we'll start with Dr. Raji Tajuddin. Dr. Raji, what are your expectations? And from Dr. Raji, we'll have what's the name? We'll have Mr. Bob Muchabaiwa, and then so that at least we go in that order.
S'il vous plaît, Madame Lynn.
Yes, thank you.
Madame Lynn, il y a un parlementaire.
Mrs. Lynn?
Yes.
There's a parliamentarian who's asking for the floor.
Oh, okay. Please proceed, Honourable Nyashanu.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam.
Yes, sir, you may proceed.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much, Madam. I have been touched by the discussions going on. I feel we have a lot as parliamentarians
to do within our parliaments, particularly on the rights and welfare of children. I am touched by the fact that in many parliaments, we don't have parliamentary caucus that focuses on the rights and welfare of children. And it would have made it so easy for parliamentarians to make the executive to account. I just felt that it's something that we need to be looking at, establishing parliamentary caucuses on the rights and welfare of children. And also within our governments, we need ministries, specific ministries that deals with the rights of children. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you so much. And I also noticed that there is Honourable Jose. Honourable Jose, can I give you some time to say something? Honourable Damiao Jose. I think we can proceed with the winding up.
Bem, então vamos agora.
Hello, control team. Can you assist Honourable Jose? Damiao Jose. Okay, Orange to, in a nutshell, make his expectations. What does he think the Pan-African Parliament can do, especially on this issue of fair taxation for children's rights? Mr. Tajuddin said. I think he's left, so we'll move to Mr. Bob Mchabaywa.
Thank you very much, Chairperson and honorable members. Once again, very quickly, we would request the Pan-African Parliament to ensure that child-sensitive social protection is a key component of COVID-19 fiscal responses, and that member countries honor their commitments which they made at the beginning of the pandemic. Secondly, from the last, we request the Pan-African Parliament to work with the executive to ensure transparency in COVID inflows and expenditures. And lastly, through you, Chairperson, request the Parliament to closely monitor the issue of debt procurement. Thank you. And once again, we appreciate the opportunity to be part of this discussion. Over.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gonese, for those comments. And then we will move to Save the Children.
Thank you, Chair. One of the comments I wanted to clearly indicate has already been stated clearly, that child-sensitive social protection is very key. That needs to be factored in. And another thing is that governments need to allocate a higher percentage of GDP that is inclusive to child social protection benefits as compared to what governments are currently allocating. That is the expectations that we have.
Thank you very much. And we will not leave out our youth because this meeting is for them. So I will start with Megan. Your final word on this matter. What would you like your Member of Parliament to do for the youth?
Okay. What I would like the Member of Parliament to do for us youth mostly is I want them to increase child participation.
Can you speak up a bit, Megan?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. I was saying what I want the Member of Parliament to do for us as youth and children is to create more opportunities for us. Mostly, okay, now that you're going to school, we want to go to school and finish. I think first they should apply the part where those ones who are not able to access the internet and all that to be given the space to go back to school, while us who are able to can use virtual learning. And also about
os que forem capazes vão então recorrer ao ensino virtual.
Proceed, Megan.
Oh, and also the last part is on child participation. I would like to increase child participation.
I think we have lost Megan. Budget. Maybe we go to Ruarashe.
Excuse?
Megan is in the meeting. Megan is in the meeting.
Oh. Megan, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
Please proceed.
And last is on child participation. Is to increase
e depois tem a participação da criança. Temos que aumentar oportunidades para que
shouldn't be after
devem ser aumentadas
in policy making, budget making, and anything
devem ser incluídas.
Thank you. I finished.
Okay. Thank you, Megan. We move to Abraham.
Looks like he's no longer online.
Okay. Then we move to Ruarashe. Ruarashe, are you still in?
She doesn't seem to be online either.
Okay. I think we have come to the end of our 1 minute expectations. On behalf of the Pan-African Parliament and as your Director of Ceremonies, I would like to thank you all for the information that you have shared with us. We have been taking notes profusely. We understand now that this pandemic is linked to other processes of illicit financial flows, of domestic resource mobilization, of debt management, of accountability frameworks, of how, as members of parliament, we ensure that our governments are responsive to the pandemic. We have spoken about issues of fiscal transparency to ensure the issues of equity and justice, and especially fair allocation to the issues pertaining to children. You have shared with us how you expect our members of parliament to be involved in the process of budget formulation, budget execution, budget auditing, and the oversight after the expenditures have been made. And I'm sure this is not new to our members of parliament. But more importantly, you have highlighted the need for a participatory approach between civil society and parliaments. And that is as it should be. Parliaments are there to represent people, and these people represent civil society. So in case of the Pan-African Parliament, our main function is to create platforms for citizens and civil society organizations such as yourselves to share information and to assist us. I always believe that the civil society and Pan-African and parliaments are symbiotic twins. Without the other, we cannot function properly. So we need each other in this information, in this journey. Civil society organizations are the organizations which are on the ground collecting relevant information. But when we request that when you collect that relevant information, you must share it with Parliament so that members of Parliament can then utilize it in their oversight functions, in their representation functions, and to ensure that resources are well accounted for. I have learned a lot from a personal perspective, and like I said, and the Vice President is here, and Mr. Gali Massa is here. I'm hoping that there will be another follow-up because we had restricted our membership, our participation to a few committees, but we see that there's a need for a wider group of committees to participate because the issues are wide and the issues cover most of our committees. Having said this, on my behalf, I would like to thank you very much, and I would like to hand over to Mr. Gali Masaharu, who is standing in for our Black VPR. Over to you, Mr. Gali Masaharu. Thank you.
Allô?
Monsieur Gali, vous avez coupé votre micro.
Mr. Gali, I think your microphone is muted. Your microphone is muted. Is it okay now? Is it okay? Yes, it's fine now. Yes, we can hear you. Thank you. I was saying earlier that I would like to thank our partners and SAPST, particularly for this collaboration. I'm sorry, we can hear the interpretation on the floor, the Arabic booth. And to say also that the presentations that we heard this morning on this theme has certainly allowed our members of parliament to take stock of the difficulties faced by children during this pandemic. And also the public policies. I'm sorry, there seems to be interference again. Whether it be fiscal policies, have, of course, a direct influence on what is going on. So all these presentations have been extremely useful and will certainly go towards helping us and will allow us to be able to have a look at all the recommendations which have been formulated after having heard all these presentations, which will allow us to translate these recommendations and will be submitted to the plenary at the right time when, of course, conditions allow us to hold our meetings and certainly of our parliamentary sessions. Once more, I would like to thank all the presenters. I would also like to particularly mention here the presence of Honourable Charumbira, which has also allowed us to undertake this activity, and we feel that we are certainly convinced that with his leadership we will be able to undertake similar actions and allow us to certainly take into consideration the conditions of children. And I would also like finally to thank our other colleagues who have participated in the meeting and which have supported us, and also the interpreters without whom this meeting would not have been possible. Once more, thank you very much to each and one of you, and I would like to wish you a very good afternoon. I don't know if Honourable Chief Charumbira, you have anything you would like to say. I would like you to have the last word to allow us to close this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gali. Can you hear me?
Oui, je vous entends bien, honorable.
Am I audible? Fine, I proceed. Look, again, this has been a great moment of sharing of ideas, information, scientific data on issues of COVID-19, and also as it relates to children. So thank you very much, PAP, SAPST, CDC, UNICEF. I won't complete the list, but you're all very important. My last observation will be the youth who presented from Kenya. We have noted your plea for parliamentarians to create opportunities for you even after school, and the issues of access to internet and the like. That is noted. On recommendations, I recommend that PAP takes seriously on its part to ensure that the issue of allocation of resources by parliaments, regional and national, is taken seriously and does not end here. The issue of model, whether budget or tax, that deliberately parliaments to put more to put more resources to national parliaments. And then lastly, to PAP, to ourselves, I think it was a serious oversight, and it's part of my recommendation. Because it was an oversight, can we address this issue? In all the presentations or submissions, issues of budgets, issues of financing, transfer price pricing, taxation. These are issues of the Finance and Budget Committee, which was absent in this meeting. We have spoken about issues of education in detail, and I don't think the Education Committee was represented. Health, I doubt. I know gender, you invited gender and human rights only. That was a serious oversight. I think we should rectify that one. The issue of violence, domestic violence, other form of violence, the committee and a representative at least from the Committee on Conflict Resolution, from PAP, should have been present. And then lastly, when we talk of tax laws, no committee is better placed than the Rules Committee to be able to draft something working with the Finance and Budget Committee on what sort of model tax laws we should formulate. Otherwise, I'm very grateful for all those who participated. I hand over back to Mr. Gali.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je crois qu'avec
Thank you very much, Mr. President. So
de l'honorable Tiff, nous n'avons plus rien à ajouter. Il ne reste qu'à remercier chacun de vous, Madame Lynn. Merci pour votre modération aussi.
And unfortunately, I would like to thank each and every one of you. I don't know if there's anything else that needs to be added. All I would like to do then is to wish a very good afternoon to everybody here present.
Merci.
Shukran.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. This is the end of our meeting. We will share the recording when we get it from our IT team. Thank you very much and goodbye.